Absolute Power #1 came out this week, and it had me thinking a little bit. Mainly just how much I do not care for event comic books at all. And it just made me want to talk a little bit for why I don't think event comic books as a concept even work. So, to start this off, we have to explain what an event comic book even is. So, about every summer or so, DC Marvel, Valiant did it back when, Valiant's still around, but Valiant's around, you know. Usually around the summer, though, they'll do a big comic event. These large stories that are supposed to stake up the status quo, kill off characters, and create an entirely new standard or universe going forward. But the reality is, it doesn't. But we'll get to that in a second. So these books usually come out, they're usually about 6 issues long, and they'll usually come out over the summer. There'll be a ton of tie ins, though pushback against tie ins has sort of decreased the number of tie ins you'll see. You don't really see as many tie ins like you used to. And the thing about all of this is that it's a smokescreen. You see, Event Comics' whole gimmick is trying to get you in on how big and spectacular it's going to be, how huge it is, and how important it is, and how if you're not reading Blood Hunt, if you're not reading Absolute Power, Secret Invasion, Civil War, then you're going to be out of the conversation. But I'll be honest, how many people are even in that conversation? The answer is not as much. And when they are in the conversation, they're rather whelmed. Not overwhelmed, not underwhelmed, just very whelmed. Because we all know they're not gonna be that important. You see, event comics as a concept dates back to a long, long time, and I would say probably the biggest starter of it, the where you could probably point to, is actually possibly, and some people are gonna yell at me and disagree with me on this. Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, I'm not saying it's the first big story. God, no, I'm not saying it's the first big story. And I'm definitely not saying it's the only story that has ever done the things it's done. I'm definitely not saying it's the only story that started that trend, but just it's one of those first big things where I think that is where the trend, where the if you're not reading this, you'll be out of the conversation is. Because, well, how else can you put it? You have something that completely restarted the DC universe, and if you didn't read that, you were out of the loop. If you were reading it, all your comics just kind of stopped for a little bit, and then after those 12 issues, boom, new Earth, boom, no more universes, boom, there's only one Earth, boom, there's only one timeline. And while it didn't immediately start it, I think it set a precedent on that. Comics can have these big, big events that completely change everything that happened before. And I think it took a little time to develop. I would say to a degree where we then see the more of the modern event could be viewed as the death of Superman. Not the modern event, but another keystone in it. The modern event actually is going to be Civil War. Another keystone in the timeline, I'd probably go with maybe the death of Superman, just because it showed how much fucking mainstream appeal and how much goddamn money can be made off of the idea. Just how much oodles and oodles of money can be made off of it. And it's not like it was bad story. Listen, as we're going to get to one of the reasons I don't think these things work, they weren't going to keep Superman dead. When they killed Batman off in Final Crisis, you knew he wasn't going to stay dead. As much as I like Dick Bat, everyone likes Dick Bat. And I love we call him Dick Bat. We all knew that Bruce was coming back. We all knew it. Fuck, my memory's failing me here, and I could just open my copy of the book, but I'm 90% sure they actually hinted that he wasn't dead in the final issue because they knew they couldn't trick you anyway, so why even try? But first off, we got a lot of good characters out of it. I remember, if I remember correctly, I think that was the first appearance of Connor Kent. He got Steel, Eradicator, Cyborg Superman. Hank Henshaw, who gives a shit? But you got some good characters out of it, and you got people reading. And as far as DC is concerned, you got a lot of motherfuckers just buying the book. Now, sure, some of those people didn't read the book. I mean, this was the speculator boom. But a lot of motherfuckers bought the book. And as far as DC's concerned, they don't give a shit if you wipe your ass with the book as long as they got your money. So then we get to maybe the first modern event, and that'd probably be Civil War and the Bendis. Did you call it a trilogy? Was it a trilogy? He did like I forget how many events he did, because some I forget about. But the Bendis arc, I think, is then when we have to talk about where modern events really started. It's kind of like a trend, and Civil War was a big deal. I'm pretty sure every person who bought Marvel Unlimited had the same goal at one point, which was let me read every bit of Civil War so I can get a full appreciation of it. And every person with Marvel Unlimited had the same conclusion. What a waste of goddamn time that was. And this is coming from someone who is such a loser that at one point I wrote up an actual bill of what the Civil War, the Superhuman Registration Act would probably have to be effective, because I have a problem and I should see a therapist. I'm not going to, but I probably should at some point. And the thing is, Bendis kind of started this trend. You know, he's like, I have the next 10 years of the Marvel history planned out. And yeah, he did. He did. And we had like Secret Invasion, and then it went into the Heroic Age and all of that stuff. And it was true that if you weren't following it, things would change and the universe wouldn't make sense. And I think in many ways you can actually see from these three examples and why I picked them how things fell apart. Because when you start off, a big thing is about being part of the conversation. You want to be able to tap, 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 tap. I don't know if the mic's picking up my fingers tapping on the table, but you want to be able to go on your keyboard and keep up with it. Or back when Crisis on Infinite Earths was out, probably talk to people at your comic shop. But you know, I use social interactions like kryptonite, so I'm not gonna do that. But you would want to be there talking about it. And with Crisis on Infinite Earths, yeah, you would literally have no idea what was going on. You'd be going from Superman, the John Burns Superman, you'd be confused why you're going for the origin story again. You know, Batman suddenly completely started over, you know, all of that stuff. So it'd be confusing, it would be weird. And then you go to Death of Superman, where he's back by the end of this story arc. You know, Death and Rebirth, he is back, baby. And even with the long. Actually, did he have long hair before or after Death? I think he had it before Death. But regardless, the black suit didn't stick around too long, even though it's been pretty impactful. I mean, they're bringing it back for absolute power, actually, according to the trailers. He's going to be wearing it. But for the most part, there wasn't much of a big deal other than, hey, here's two new characters. And Superman died once. And Doomsday exists. Oh, yeah, Doomsday's a new character from Death. But if you decide to say, fuck Death of Superman, you wouldn't miss too much. Like, you could actually just know that Superman died once and never read the story and it'd be okay. So it's a less of it. And then when you get to Civil War, there are changes to the Marvel Universe, and if you don't follow it, yes, it does get weird. And yes, I know Marvel, DC, I'm jumping between the two, but they're not parasitic, they're symbiotic. So when one person does something, the other person takes notes. They used to be across the street. They used to have lunch at the same spots, according to interviews. That's how the Amalgam Universe happened. Is apparently they just went to get sandwiches at the same shop. So sandwiches friggin' cause things. So I don't think it's weird to ping pong between the two when they're taking notes from each other. You know, they're definitely looking at each other's sales figures. But the thing with the Bendis arc is that, and I remember this at the time, it's sure it would change things, but it would change it too quickly. You'd, I mean, honestly, it only gave you like what, like a year and a half before the next event, and it would always be one of those cases where by the time you thought the status quo was getting interesting, oh fuck you, the story's over. We're moving to the next status quo chain. You thought the post Civil War era should have had 5 years, in my opinion, 5 years to really digest. Nah, fuck you, time for scrolls. And I like Brian Bendis, by the way. I think Bendis gets way too much heat. Wrote the best version of Spider-Man, 100%. One of my favorite runs on Spider-Man. But still, whoever was behind that meant that anything that happened didn't matter because it changed. And so quickly. Because we got to keep getting those sales figures. And we end up ending at a point where I think we're at the modern event sort of crystallized. Now, there was more evolution, Of course, but I don't know if I want to go for the nuances of every single event. I mean, we don't need to talk about every single event. You know, I skipped a ton already, but there's been so many in the last few years. I mean, what am I going to talk about? You know, Dark Crisis. Am I going to talk about Dark Knight's Metal? Am I going to talk about Fear itself? I bet you didn't remember Fear itself. I bet Marvel doesn't remember Fear itself. You know, there has been an evolution, but at this point, I don't know if grabbing touchstones matters as much as it is just discussing the general growing dissatisfaction as people realize that at the end of the day, a lot of the characters that get introduced, if they're lucky, one of them sticks around. If they're lucky. Any status quo changes, maybe a year, maybe a year at most. And I feel like over there we start seeing a decline. And I feel like to a degree, if I was going to pick one out of the hat as an example of when maybe people really got sick, when event fatigue probably was at its peak, I would actually choose, and this might be an odd pick, and I'll be honest, I'm more of a casual comic book fan, so take this as you will. Actually, Secret Empire, because that's when I remember when people really got mad. Now, going into that would probably make why people got mad, would probably make this discussion a little bit more political than I wanted it to be. But a lot of bad timing by Nick Spencer on his discussion. And I understand what he wanted to talk about, which, you know, to get a little political, stories are political, people. It's a thing. It was a discussion of the rise in right wing and fascist viewpoints in the United States at the time. And well, till today, it's still going on. But handled with all of the nuance of a bull running through a china shop by someone who I want to say had good intentions, but didn't really know how to. I want to say good intention. I've heard a lot of aspersions to his character, but I don't have the fucks to give to learn enough about him as a person or care. But I want to say it was probably good intentions mixed with bad execution. But I remember that was the period of time where people were just really, really sick of it because they managed to hit a nerve with the general comic book audience, which I feel like when it comes to majority, I feel like most people who read comics are left leaning. There's a lot of vocal right leaning people who read comics, but I always get the vibe that whenever I go into online circles, and it could be a bubble thing, it's mostly a left leaning thing. And it just happened to hit that point where after that point, I feel like events started to become more honest in a way. But also, this is where we're going to get into why I think this shit doesn't work and why they and I understand it's all about sales, but from a storytelling perspective, this shit's got to stop. Because around that point, I want to say we hit this point. Point. Let me see if I can say point again in a sentence. There's no script to this. If this isn't obvious, I am just very, very kind of depressed today and felt to talk about something. So at this point, we end up in a situation where they're like, okay, you know, I think around that time, Marvel promised no more events, and DC was leaning away from them too. But when they came back, it was more honest that these events do not matter. These are just going to be bigger than normal stories. As a matter of fact, there was a brief period of time where they experimented with these just being the capstones to pre-existing stories. Like I was following Thor at the time, and I know I'm focusing on Marvel, even though I have that Death of Superman flag there. But I made that in Affinity, and I feel like keeping it around, and I'm not moving it uh, for their whole arc, for the whole arc of oh my god, I forgot his name, but the one who was Jason Aaron, the one who was doing Thor at the time, Jason Aaron, and I felt like that worked, and that became a thing for a while. They did that for Guardians, they did that for a few others. You know, DC, I forget what events they were running around that time. DC, I think, was still around that time period. They had just gotten out. Oh, I think that was around Doomsday Clock. I think they were doing Doomsday Clock, which was a big deal at the time, though. That was its own controversy because you dig Watchmen up for a Jeff Johns comic, and I'm someone who loved Jeff Johns' Green Lantern, and I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding him, but I actually don't know what the controversy is about. But you just dig it up for Jeff Johns to write Watchmen, really? I mean, Alan Moore was right when he joked that Jeff John owes him his entire fucking career. Uh, but man, the model tracking on this is rough. I just feel like having this little avatar because it makes me feel more comfortable than just you looking at a blank screen. Um, but around that time period, you know, they started being honest. This is not going to matter. We might introduce a character, maybe, but we know what the track record on that shit is at this point. And I feel like it's where we're getting now with Blood Hunt. and absolute power. They know these events don't matter. They're just a sales injection. They're just supposed to be big and loud, and they're all happening, and it's something that the entire, if you read Marvel, if you read DC, then you're going to read this. But honestly, the amount of tie-ins are pretty much, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't do too much research, but I've noticed the amount of tie-ins are down. I can very easily ignore them because what they like to do nowadays, at least Marvel, I forget if DC does this, is they like to do like point X issues. So instead of this actually interrupting the run, they do one extra issue that month that's like tie-in, if they're gonna do a tie-in. So maybe this is, as a fractional issue, which is a little silly when it comes to numbering, but okay. Or they'll give it like a special name, like, oh, X, name of the event, then character, issue number one, and they maybe do like a one shot, which I think is honestly the best compromise they could have come up with. But I feel like at this point, it highlights how pointless this shit is. We know it's not going to matter. We know these stories aren't going to go anywhere. We know they don't mean anything. And I get for some people it's cheesecake, it's like French fries, I only had one egg for breakfast, if that's not obvious here. Made like a deviled egg sandwich. But what I mean is, I get it. It makes you feel good, but I the formula's so obvious. And I feel like I don't know who started this formula, but it does feel to a degree it's like escalation, escalation, escalation. You know, like I'm reading Absolute Power and I'm losing my freaking gourd. Because it's like the Amanda Waller can lock off the multiverse now. She can lock off time travel. I know, it's comic books. I know, I'm fully aware it's silly, it's stupid. But you didn't have to do that. I don't read a fucking Batman comic and go, oh, why doesn't Batman just call Superman so he could beat the shit out of the Riddler? Like, I don't need you to tell me that because it's a Batman comic book. I don't read Wonder Woman and go like, she should call up Green Lantern. He might be able to help. Like, no, I get it. It's a fucking Wonder Woman comic. I don't need an explanation why other heroes aren't showing up. I don't need an explanation of why they lost their powers and not calling in other people from the multiverse. If you have that question, the answer is because it ruined the story and that they wanted to tell. I thought that was something we all just understood. You don't have to make Amanda Waller the one above all. Well, that's a bad reference for DC. The presence, that's a more DC centric one, or the Overvoid, or whatever Grant Morrison decides to call it this week while he's between shrooms. I love Grant Morrison, by the way. I'm just being funny. Like, you don't have to do that, but the reason they have to do that is escalation, because, I mean, they just did, what was it, Dark Crisis, and the one I didn't read where Wonder Woman became a god, and yeah, I'm skipping some of these, by the way. If it's not obvious, I don't read them all. But I decided to read this one just because my comic shop owner, who's a really nice dude, sometimes he puts extra books in, and because I work on Wednesdays, I have someone else pick up the books for me. So they sometimes slip things in. I just always let it go because I see their shelves are full of comic books that are unsold. So I never want to be like, oh, hey, here, take this back. I'm like, nah, screw it. I have a pretty high paying job. I'm not going to get pissed over an extra $4. You know what I mean? Especially when they were special order, especially since they're always willing to special order weird fucking indie books that I'm into. I'm not going to be a dick to them. And I am just left wondering what led us here. And I think what it is something that is something not just unique to superheroes. I was feeling this when watching the Doctor Who series finale, season finale. I guess they're called seasons again now. Uh, like a couple weeks ago, and that is you don't always have to escalate. It's okay to have a small story. Like I didn't like Identity Crisis, but I did for a lot of reasons, like a lot of reasons. As reasons I don't want to get into. Um, but it shows you can do a story that's a big event for the series where it's just a small personal story. Like I think there were some fucking problems in the choice of subject matter. I think there's a reason women who were working at DC were rightfully uncomfortable with how Dan DiDio felt so proud about a certain plot element. That's according to interviews, they were getting uncomfortable with how like you know happy Dan DiDio was with a certain story arc, and they're like, Dan, stop bringing that up. That's really triggering. And I don't, before triggering was like a thing people said. But all my issues with it. Also, the fact that the mystery's a load of bullshit, by the way, because like I was on something awful at the time, and we were like following the mystery, and it's now become like a fucking joke. I don't go to something awful anymore, but it was like a fucking joke. Because we were all speculating like, oh, what could be, and it was like the big reveal like didn't make any fucking sense. It didn't follow anything. It was a little pulled out of its asshole reveal, and it's why they still call their comic book form Batman's Shameful Secret. Anyway, that's not important. But the important thing is it shows you can have a big story that's just very personal, or honestly, the premise is fine enough as it is. Like what they wanted to do with Absolute Power, for reference, is let's remake JLA Act of God, a comic book no one liked. I want to be clear here. No one liked Act of God. I'm trying to shake my head no, but the model just looks so janky. But made this in Vroid Studios, by the way, if you're curious. Um, so should be. I'm not monetizing this. I'm not a partner, so it should be fine. But JLA Act of God was a comic no one liked. For those who don't know, it was an Elseworld storyline where a purplish little wave of energy goes through, and like all the superheroes lose their powers. And it is never explained why. And the entire book seems to just be jerking Batman off about how great he is. You can't see the hand motions I'm making right now. Oh, he's so great. He was always a hero without powers, and you guys were, wanting to be gods, and you're bad because you wanted to be gods. And like, no, no, and no, they didn't. And like, Superman's like super depressed the whole time. Like, I couldn't save them because I lost my powers. And it's like, shut the fuck up. Like, actually, shut the fuck up. That is not Superman. And Wonder Woman becomes Christian at the end of that book. What the fuck? God, I'm just remembering how. Wait, why did they want to remake JLA Act of God? Like, okay, I guess because most people have agreed the premise of like, what if all the superheroes lose their power had some merit. Sorry. I lost myself in how shit that book was. But I, why? Oh God, I'm just remembering more of that book. But anyway, the premise is okay. I get what they want to do. It's one of those premises that are kind of hard to do. It's like, how do you explain, Martian Manhunter losing his powers? He doesn't have powers. He's a green Martian. Everything he does is just what green Martians do. It's as natural to them as breathing, and whenever they depict green Martian society as not being like destroyed, he's always just depicted as completely normal. John Ostrander's run, by the way, if you ever want to read Martian Manhunter and want to learn to love him, John Ostrander's run, and also JLA International by John Ostrander. Those I would suggest if you wanted to like ever get into Martian Manhunter. Highly recommend. I own those books; they're very good. Back to the point though. And funny enough, I remember talking to people when this book was coming up, and I said it'd be so easy if you just said Brainiac did it, because Brainiac is a 12th level intellect, and he could probably invent a way to just make you all strong as a regular human. And it's pretty funny because they actually did go that angle with Brainiac's wife, and a character that I don't remember from Batman. I haven't been reading Batman that much, so I guess he was introduced. I just completely forgot about him. I'm sure there's someone screaming like, "How could you have not known about this character?" I'm like, I haven't been reading Batman that much. I think Batman's a little overexposed. There, I said it. I said the thing that everyone says, and that is somehow controversial. Like a Netflix comedian, I am being silenced. But um, my jokes are unfunny. I know they're unfunny. You don't have to tell me they're unfunny. Sorry, I'm laughing at my own goddamn bad joke. But they went that route and they explained it away. Okay, the Amazos are here. The Amazos can just do magic, whatever. Fuck it. But the structure of the book also tells me why event books don't work. There's so many goddamn characters. Like they remake the fucking opening of the Civil War, funnily enough, with Animal Man, and I don't even know who his sidekick is. I'm gonna be honest. I've never read a fucking issue of Animal Man in my life. Getting attacked like Johnny Storm was by an angry mob with the dumbest premise. Oh my god. They're using deep fakes to make us hate superheroes. I want to be clear, I like comic books and I actually like superheroes, but God, this book has me like sending me, I think, or sending me in a bad way. Like it isn't great. I don't know what you young kids say nowadays. But oh, you may. They remake that, and then just this constant thing where it's like too many characters. You can't latch onto anyone. I think that's part of the problem with event books in general. You want to have like the entire universe involved. Well, spoilers, these comics are full of characters. And so a lot of them are just mentioned offhandedly, sometimes just to wave away, like why they are not solving all of our problems. And the whole thing just leaves you reeling as it just goes through, jumping through. And I swear, I've seen this before. I don't know remember if I've seen it from Marvel, but I've seen this before from DC. This structure of just like bad thing happens, escalation, our plans are wrong, but everything's going to Kakaku. Amanda Waller is God. And I don't know why I'm shitting on Amanda. You know why? Because this is character assassination of Amanda Waller. She's actually not a bad villain, and she's really more of a anti-villain in her original portrayals. If you've ever read the original runs on Suicide Squad, she's not even meant to be a villain. She's meant to be more of an anti-villain and or anti-hero, I guess. I don't really know what the distinction between the two of those are. But she has suffered so much character assassination. Um, DC doesn't. DC is weird. DC doesn't like Amanda Waller as a character, or at least what she's supposed to be. Like, she is supposed to be a little bit wrong. Like, she's supposed to be wrong in how she does this. She's supposed to be falling apart because what she's doing is not something that's reasonable or something you can do in the long run without destroying yourself and destroying society. That's part of the point. Part of the point is that she's wrong. But and part of it's that she's not really even a good person, but that she has good intentions. You know, the kind of the path to hell is paved with good intentions concept. In her original like prediction, that's what she's supposed to be like. Like, she knows what she's doing is wrong. She knows that she's crossing lines, and but on one hand, she has parts of the US government that wants her to do even more evil shit, and she's actually pushing against it, and then parts that want her to be less evil, and she is constantly stuck between these like many different things. And her original character arc is her disbanding the Suicide Squad, going into missions with them, and trying to undo the bad shit when a more evil wing of the government does like another Suicide Squad, and like it causes like a lot of problems in Latin America. And it's about, I think they adapted. I have to see the 2019 movie, but I think they partially adapted that storyline. And she personally leads the squad to try to unfuck how her concept has been perverted, and then she disbands the squad. Like, her character arc is pretty clear. She's a person with good intentions who has gone down the wrong pathway. I think the DCAU actually did a decent job of adapting this depiction of her, especially as over time she, kind of realizes what she's doing is wrong and how this is not actually lining up with her intentions in that adaptation. But I feel like ever since then, DC has forgotten what the point of her character is. Because she's not a flat character. Most superheroes are, sorry, not flat character, flat character arc. There are different types of character arcs, and one is the flat character arc, and that's when you already have the answer. So Superman has a flat character arc. He's not a flat character. Here he has a flat character arc. That means he started out already with the answers. He already has a truth that is correct, and it brings positive change. And the real question, the real story is, how does outside factors interact with him? Like, how does he interact with the rest of the world since he's already reached the end of his journey as a person? That's a flat character arc, and most superheroes are actually like that to a degree. They're already in a finalized state. They might have a little bit of growth, a little bit of things to go through, but the stories are not about their personal growth. Their stories are more usually about how the outside world reacts to them and how they react to the outside world. And she's not like that, which means in a way, she has more of a timer on her, because the point of flat character arcs is that you can write infinite stories with those characters. You plot them anywhere, and you have a plot. You plot Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man, anywhere, and because they've already pretty much have established personality traits, they have truths they hold on to. They already have they're at the end of their character journey. You can tell any story. Where a character who has to grow, well, they can only work in certain circumstances. You throw Amanda Waller out of the Task Force S and you put her somewhere else, well, things get a little bit more dicey. And how well can she actually do her character arc if she's not dealing with these specific problems? And that's where you get into more of a issue. And I always feel like because of that, DC is never really sure what to do with her. I mean, they try to make her skinny like every other time they think they can get away with it until people get annoyed. But also on a character side, it's just been this slow descent into removing the anti from the anti hero or anti villain, whichever is the right term, and just she's a villain. She's a villain where if they wanted to have a deeper commentary, it would actually be interesting about how the US government's main representative is more concerned with stopping the volunteers trying to help people than the actual villains. But I don't think DC or Marvel, in their current overly corporate state, are willing to actually go there. This is not going to be one like that issue of Captain America, where it turns out the leader of the hate mongers, or was it no, it was the leader of the Secret Empire. It's been a long time. A Secret Empire. Turned out to be Nixon, and then he fucking unalives himself, or whatever you have to say oh wait, I said Suicide Squad. Fuck it, he commits suicide. Um, yeah, like because of that. That's a real comic, by the way, from like the 70s. I think Nixon was still in office at the time too. Uh, but they're not willing to go that far anymore. Not they're too corporate for that. So the level of like discourse you could have if you wanted to like discuss like why Amanda Waller views Superman more of a threat, the way you could actually have a legitimate discussion about that. Something that actually to a degree my adventures with Superman is able to handle a little bit if you've seen the show. Where, one thing that gets the American government on Lex Luthor and Task Force X's side. I'm not really sure if they're really working with the government or not with that, by the way. I can't remember, but they definitely get a lot of big military brass on their side by pointing out that Superman has the power to turn the tides of war. And do you really want that as a rogue agent? That, is a way of like actually discussing, something a little deeper with it, even if it was only a brief mention. But no, they don't want to really touch that. So at this point, she's just, you know, hates superheroes more than super villains with how everything is shown. And it makes you wonder, like, what's the point of her character? And so first off, now you to make this story work, you had to make well, even though it is just a culmination of not even culmination, just trend of her reduction as a character, but into this two-dimensional supervillain that can just kick everyone's ass because they're so powerful. But you have to make everyone else to a degree bumbling, and things don't matter. Everyone's already realized that Green Arrow is not going to be an actual traitor. It's going to be a double agent reveal in like issue 4. And the only real question of whether or not it's going to be like that issue, the very common trend where they reveal their secret plan, but oh no, the secret plan was already fully aware. And so I swear I've seen this a few times. I'm remembering a specific example from Dark Knight's Metal, where I think it was like the Flash was always hiding within I think it was called Red Death or whatever the evil Bruce Wayne Flash fusion was, and that he was always waiting for the right moment to switch back, only for it to be like, oh no, the Batman who laughs always knew, and it's not gonna work. So that moment of triumph, fuck you. And it's like, God, I hate that shit. Like, listen, I actually do not mind if you want to have darker stories or if you want to get political or anything like that. Honestly speaking, I'm just being a little coy because I don't want to get killed on YouTube comments and all of that stuff. But, God, just the way it goes about in modern event comics, where it's so vapid, it's so formulaic. I just hate it. And I especially hate the whole, oh, any sense of triumph has to be broken because we haven't hit the issue count yet. Like fuck it, remember when they used to do like one when like they'd be like, oh, this is one of 3 issues, this is one of 2 issues, instead of everything having to be like 6 issues. And most ish storylines were in one issue, so you get like a nice satisfying single plot. Remember when most media was episodic to a degree, so you got one little thing? I don't mind serialized. As a matter of fact, I hate when there's no change or recognition of previous things because I have issues. Always complaining about how the Saturday morning cartoons never actually learned their lessons. But it's also like to a degree where I think things are serialized to a degree. Like we don't everything doesn't have to be a 6 issue story. And I do think there has been some pullback from everything being 6 issues. But I do think to a degree comics would probably do better. I'm gonna say something controversial here. I feel like either you cut the middleman out and you just go to trades, or you go back to 1 issue stories. I feel like this current middle ground doesn't work for anyone perfectly because you have trade waiters and you have people reading issue to issue, and both of them are very dissatisfied with this middle ground approach. Like, let's be honest. I know why we do it because manga is way more successful, and I love manga. But, huge fan. If you could not tell by the fact that I chose this thing to use as an avatar, this anime thing. I don't know how to describe this. The model's name is Hamori. I name all the models Hamori. I don't know why. But I don't think this structure works there, honestly. But that's a different discussion. But it also does tie into the events a little bit too, because they have to hit the 6 issues, because it has to last the summer. And it leads to just this dissatisfaction I think we all get with these events. And we have a term for it, event fatigue, but it's nothing new. And then, like, to a degree, like I said, this is just an eventing, just because it's not because of that. I have, like, a bunch of shit going on in my life that ain't going super great right now, to tell you the truth. I don't want to get into. I'm not here to trauma dump. But I just felt like this is something mild and vapid I could speak about, rant, get my feelings out, put it up, and pretend like people give a shit. You know. But yeah, don't think we need these anymore. Because, and I want to say one more point before I end this stupid rant that most people have clicked off of like 20 minutes ago. But I think the biggest issue in all these stories is this: when you have 30, 40 characters in your cast, it stops, a key element of the story goes away, and that is character beats, characters in general. Because you now have so many of them, none of them can be developed, none of them can really have a moment to shine. I run a lot of tabletop role playing games, and what I always tell GMs is you have to make sure that every character that is in the game has at least one moment to shine per session. Your session can suck dick. You could be hungover and sick, but as long as you give every person one moment to shine, and the trick to that, unrelated, is read their character sheet, learn, use it as a roadmap to figure out what they give a shit about, and find a moment that matters to them, they'll be satisfied because they got their one moment. And when I feel like if you're writing a comic book story, you need to have a moment where the character has something interesting, something to stand out, something to make the reader feel like, yeah, that was good. And the more characters you pile into a story, the harder and harder it is to actually have that. And once you get to the level event comics do, the characters become interchangeable and vapid, and you just are left wondering, okay, too much is going on. And when you consider what superhero comics really are, at their core, they're character pieces about like one person, which is why their name is on the cover. It doesn't matter if that cover says Katana, it doesn't matter if that says Zatanna. It is about that person and their supporting crew. When it suddenly becomes about every single goddamn person under the sun, well, spoilers, they don't all matter. They don't all work, and you're just left feeling like they're set dressing. Because they are. They objectively are. I mean, I swear to Christ, the dialogue is even interchangeable. Seriously, just imagine instead of Batman freaking out for all absolute power, it was Mr. Terrific. It wouldn't change a fucking thing. He doesn't say anything that specific to Batman. Instead of if instead of Superman getting shot because when he loses his powers, it was Wonder Woman, it wouldn't change a goddamn thing. And I want to be clear, none of this is the shit on Mark Waid, who I believe is the writer of Absolute Power, because Mark Waid's made a lot of great stories. Because I really think it's more the format and the formula that's the problem. Oh, I haven't even read Bloodhunt, by the way. My comic book shop guy has been giving me issues, and I'm just like, I'm good. You know, I still, like I said, I never say no, but why are we even doing a fucking vampire event in the summer? Because that's when events happen. That's literally what my brother said. Well, you know what? Spoilers. Events should a fucking vampires are an October thing. Everyone knows that. But yeah, all these characters become interchangeable mouthpieces, and you just don't care. You just don't give a shit, because if you wanted to read a superhero story, you wanted to focus on someone. And listen, it's not like you can't have plot driven things, but holy hell, those plots have to be strong. Like, Crisis on Infinite Earths works, sure, but it had a strong plot and really amazing art. Not to shit on the artwork of absolute power. I actually think it looks pretty not that's actually a well drawn book, or anything like that. And I'm like I said, Mark Waid's not a bad writer, but you need a really strong, solid plot to work with this kind of thing. And honestly, frankly, it does not have that. And honestly, most events do not seem to have that. And I think that's why most people don't care. Oh my god, remember what was it, last year? Marvel tried to redo Civil War, but it was only teenage superheroes. Was that last year or 2 years ago? Oh god. Okay, anyway, I don't want to make this endless. But yeah, that's my main points really. I feel like event comics don't contribute anything. I mean, I could have gone an entire rant about how tie-in issues literally have made me drop books before and probably have tanked some entire series. And by probably, I mean they have, but I don't remember which ones they did off the top of my head. But since they've actually pulled back on tie-in issues, that's now a mute point. Or a moot point? I think it's a moot point. A moot point. But it is damage it used to do. But generally, I don't know. I feel like if you really, so instead of just complaining, I'll say this. I think the better future would be if comic books, instead of doing all this crap, which they do all the effing time of this, doing yearly events, if they just maybe just did them once every 5 years, made them maybe a little bit longer, and made them actually matter. Because let's be honest, most superhero, I mean, DC pretty much resets its continuity every 5 years. As a matter of fact, wait a minute, isn't that what they were doing? Because you got like Infinite Crisis, then Zero Hour. Wait, fuck, that was what they used to do. And that did work better, even though Zero Hour sucked. Yeah. So yeah, I think that would probably be better. I'm not really sure how to end this. This was just letting off steam. I'll be shocked if I upload this. Also, I need to put something in the background here because right now it's just pure black with the Superman flag. I don't know, maybe put like a cover behind this. Anyway, if you've watched this, why? Seriously, you had a lot of better things you could have done.